On a stretch of frozen muskeg that would swallow a truck whole by afternoon, Corporal James Monroe of the 97th Engineer Regiment swings a pickaxe against earth that rings like steel. The permafrost doesn't crack, it deflects. Behind him, 200 men from Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia. Men who'd never seen snow before last week. Men equipped with hand tools designed for warm weather construction, now facing 1,120 miles of the most unforgiving terrain on the continent. The numbers coming through from Corps headquarters are staggering. 8 months to complete what civilian engineers estimated would take 5 years. Enemy aircraft already bombing Dutch Harbor. Japanese troops occupying Attu and Kiska in the Aleutians. Alaska, cut off, vulnerable, and absolutely critical, had no land connection to the United States, but now something different. An order that surprises even the officers delivering it. The 93rd, 95th, 97th, and 388th Engineer Regiments, all black units, segregated, given the Army's worst equipment and most dismissive commanders, are being sent north to do what white engineering battalions have already declared impossible. What happens in the next 8 months will set a construction record that defies every prediction. The fastest military road ever built through wilderness terrain. But more than that, it will demonstrate something the U.S. Army Command had never fully grasped. Black soldiers didn't just have strong backs or disposable labor. They had something far more dangerous: the competence to succeed where others had failed, and the determination to prove it. To understand why the Alaska Highway represented such a shock to military expectations, you have to go back to how the U.S. Army understood both Arctic construction and black soldiers' capabilities. For decades, perhaps since Reconstruction, the American military had built its entire racial doctrine around a concept of separate and unequal. Black soldiers could serve, but only in labor battalions. They could build, but only under white supervision. They had strength, the thinking went, but not the intelligence for technical work, not the discipline for impossible conditions. This wasn't just prejudice, it was institutionalized policy. Army field manuals literally rated black troops as unsuitable for complex engineering tasks. The assumption was that when faced with real adversity, with challenges requiring innovation rather than just muscle, these units would fail. The idea that segregated black regiments could solve engineering problems that had stumped West Point graduates, problems involving thermodynamics, improvised solutions to permafrost, and maintaining mechanical equipment in temperatures that froze diesel fuel solid, seemed more theoretical than practical. This wasn't ignorance. Army leadership had extensive documentation. They knew these soldiers had built infrastructure across the South. They knew about the technical training some had received. What they didn't fully appreciate, what they couldn't quite believe until they saw it with their own eyes, was the ingenuity under pressure. The challenge was unlike anything attempted before. Permafrost, ground frozen solid for thousands of years, becomes the consistency of porridge when thawed. Standard construction techniques fail catastrophically. Drive stakes during winter. Watch your bridge collapse in spring. Cut through frozen earth. Expose it to warmth. And the road becomes a river of mud that swallows bulldozers like quicksand. The system that would work required constant innovation. Corduroy roads built from thousands of logs, laid perpendicular to create a floating foundation. Tire chains forged on site when supply chains failed. Controlled burning to clear forest without thawing permafrost. Solutions that weren't in any manual, that couldn't be radioed to headquarters for approval, that had to be invented by crews working 16-hour shifts at 50 below. This wasn't just difficult. It was considered by civilian contractors to be suicide. Better to wait for proper funding, proper equipment, proper conditions, they argued. The wilderness would still be there after the war. And the military, for all its urgency about Alaska's vulnerability, had never quite internalized what segregated units could accomplish when given impossible orders and insufficient resources. The morning of March 1942 began with disbelief. Southern regiments, men who'd trained in Alabama heat, stepping off trains into Arctic cold. White officers openly doubting their black troops could survive, let alone build. Supply officers forgetting to send cold-weather gear to black units while white battalions received full Arctic equipment. Lieutenant Colonel Heath Twitchell, one of the few white officers who believed in his men, watched the 97th arrive and later wrote, "They showed up with summer-weight uniforms and determination that could melt steel. Half my job became fighting the supply chain instead of the wilderness." The terrain was proving every skeptic right, initially. Bulldozers broke through ice and disappeared into hidden streams. Men lost toes to frostbite. Equipment failures were constant. Radio communications barely functioned in the cold. But something else was happening that headquarters hadn't anticipated. The black regiments were adapting faster than their white counterparts. Men from Louisiana who'd grown up poor, who'd improvised solutions their entire lives because proper resources were never available to them, looked at broken equipment differently. A welder from Birmingham couldn't get replacement parts, so he fabricated them. A surveyor from Georgia, given inadequate maps, taught himself to navigate by stars and terrain. When white battalions radioed for instructions, black units found solutions and reported results. By week 3, the pattern was undeniable. Progress reports showed the Southern regiments, the ones everyone expected to fail, advancing faster, adapting better, losing fewer men to cold weather injuries despite having worse equipment. The 95th Regiment, working from the Alaska side, met conditions considered impossible. Ground so frozen it required heating with fire before digging, followed by instant mud when thawed, followed by refreezing overnight that could crack new concrete like glass. Standard procedure said stop work until spring. The 95th said, "We'll figure it out." And they did. Log foundations, gravel insulation, drainage systems designed on napkins and built the same day. Solutions that would later become standard Arctic engineering practice, invented by men the Army had rated as incapable of technical thought. September 24, 1942. Soldiers Summit, Yukon Territory. Mile 1061. Two teams, one pushing south from Alaska, one driving north from Canada, had been racing through the wilderness for 6 months. The 18th Engineer Regiment, white from the north, coming south. The 97th Engineer Regiment, black from the deep south, pushing north. They were supposed to miss each other by miles, require weeks of additional surveying to connect. The terrain was unmapped. The margin for error was enormous. At 14:30 hours, through a gap in the spruce forest, a bulldozer operator from Mississippi named Private Refines Sims Jr. saw it. Another dozer, coming toward him from the opposite direction. He stopped. The white operator from Minnesota stopped. For a moment, both men just stared. They were within 50 feet of perfect alignment. 6 months of cutting through wilderness from opposite directions, using improvised surveying techniques and dead reckoning, and they'd met almost exactly on the planned route. The handshake that followed, captured in photographs that the Army tried to suppress because it showed integrated troops in a moment of triumph, lasted several minutes. Officers from both units stood in stunned silence. Colonel James O'Connor, white commander of the Northern Section, sent a telegram to headquarters that evening. Navigation executed with precision that would credit any unit, any race, any conditions. Recommend full commendation. The recommendation was filed and forgotten, but the road was connected, ahead of schedule. Against every prediction, June 3, 1942, Japanese carrier aircraft bombed Dutch harbor. 4 days later, enemy troops landed on American soil. Kiska and Attu in the Aleutian Islands. For the first time since 1812, a foreign military force occupied United States territory. Alaska suddenly was no longer a frozen afterthought. It was the war's northern front. The problem was simple and terrifying. There was no way to get there. Ships could be torpedoed. Aircraft had limited range and payload. The only reliable route to defend America's northern frontier was one that didn't exist: a land connection through 1,500 miles of roadless wilderness. President Roosevelt authorized it within weeks: the Alaska-Canada Military Highway. Dawson Creek, British Columbia to Fairbanks, Alaska. 8 months to completion. Army Corps engineers reviewed the proposal and delivered their assessment. Impossible. Not difficult, not inadvisable. Impossible. The reports were clinical in their pessimism. Winter temperatures reaching 70 below zero. Permafrost that turned to swamp when disturbed. Muskeg, organic muck that could swallow vehicles whole, covering thousands of square miles. Mountain ranges with no surveyed passes. Rivers with no bridges. Mosquito swarms in summer that could suffocate pack animals. And perhaps most damning, zero infrastructure. No supply depots. No roads to build the road. No towns, no rail lines, nothing but wilderness that had defeated every previous attempt at penetration. One senior engineer calculated it would require 5 years under optimal conditions with unlimited resources. The Army had 8 months and a wartime budget already stretched thin across 2 oceans, but orders didn't ask for feasibility assessments. Orders demanded compliance. And so the call went out. Engineer regiments, combat battalions, heavy equipment operators, anyone who could dig, build, or drive. They came from across the continent, converging on a project that many privately believed was sending men north to freeze for a road that would never be completed. Among those called were 4 regiments that Army planners viewed with particular skepticism: the 93rd, 95th, 97th, and 388th Engineer General Service Regiments, all black, all segregated, all commanded by white officers who'd been given these assignments as career dead ends. They arrived from Fort Bragg, from Louisiana, from training camps in Alabama and Georgia. Men who'd grown up in sharecropper shacks and Mississippi cotton fields, who'd never seen snow, stepping off trains into an Arctic wind that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. The white battalions received cold weather gear, insulated tents, proper rations. The black regiments received summer weight uniforms, canvas tents designed for temperate climates, and equipment that was already obsolete when it was manufactured. Lieutenant Colonel Heath Twitchell, assigned to command the 97th, watched his men disembark and later wrote to his wife. They arrived with insufficient clothing, insufficient tools, and an assignment everyone expects them to fail. The only thing they have in abundance is something Washington didn't account for. They've spent their entire lives being told what they couldn't do, then doing it anyway. The Alaska Highway wasn't just an engineering challenge. It was a test of assumptions the Army had never intended to run, and the permafrost was waiting. The cold, it turned out, wasn't the worst enemy. Private Robert Colley of the 97th Regiment wrote home in April 1942, "We can handle 50 below. We can handle the mud and the mosquitoes. What breaks a man is working 16 hours in that cold, then hearing your own captain tell visiting brass that we're not capable of precision work." The racism didn't hide in shadows. It stood in broad daylight and issued orders. Major William Griggs, assigned to oversee the 95th Regiment's northern section, made his assessment clear in an official report. Negro troops lack the mental capacity for technical problem-solving required in Arctic engineering. Recommend limiting their duties to manual labor under constant white supervision. When surveying equipment went missing, diverted to white units farther south, Black regiments were told to make do. When cold weather rations failed to arrive, officers shrugged and suggested the men weren't accustomed to rich food anyway. When diesel fuel allocations ran short, the 388th received half what they'd requisitioned, while white battalions stockpiled surplus. The message was clear: you're here to fail. And when you do, it will confirm everything we already believe. Lieutenant James Cole of the 93rd kept a diary that wouldn't be published until 40 years later. One entry from May reads, "Requested replacement parts for 3 broken bulldozers. Denied. Watched the 341st, white, receive 4 new machines they didn't even need. Their captain drove past our camp and waved. Not friendly, mocking." The isolation compounded everything. Black regiments were assigned the most remote sections, furthest from supply depots, deepest in wilderness. Radio contact was sporadic. Medical support was minimal. When Private Eugene Richardson developed appendicitis 80 miles from the nearest aid station, he died during the evacuation. The official report cited logistical challenges. His squad leader said what everyone knew: a white soldier would have had a helicopter. And through it all, the officers who were supposed to lead them often led the doubt instead. "You'll never finish this road," Captain Raymond Stewart told his assembled company of the 97th in June. Not as motivation, as fact. "Command knows it. I know it. Might as well accept it now and save yourselves the humiliation." But something was happening that Stewart and Griggs and all the doubters couldn't see, or refused to acknowledge. In segregated camps, away from white officers' quarters, black soldiers gathered around fires and made different calculations. Sergeant William Pryor stood before his platoon and said it plain. "They sent us here to prove we're inferior. So we've got one job: prove them liars." Corporal James Monroe, who'd been swinging that pickaxe against Permafrost since March, put it differently. "Back home, they tell us what we can't do every single day. We're 3,000 miles north now, and it's the same story. Only difference is, this time we're holding the tools that'll build the proof." The flicker of something started then. Not hope. Hope was too soft a word for what men felt when racism followed them to the Arctic Circle. It was pride. Quiet, burning, defiant pride. And it was about to move mountains. Pickaxes rang against earth frozen for 10,000 years. Steel bent. Handles splintered. Men swung until their shoulders separated, then switched arms and swung again. Private Marcus Webb described it like trying to dig through iron, except iron doesn't turn into quicksand when the sun hits it. Because that was the devil's bargain of Arctic construction. Winter ground was solid as concrete, impenetrable. Spring thaw turned it to porridge that swallowed bulldozers to their cabins. Sergeant Ellis watched a 6-ton cat disappear into muskeg in under 4 minutes. We could hear the engine still running, 15 feet down. Gone! So they innovated. Corduroy roads, thousands of logs laid perpendicular, creating a floating foundation that distributed weight across the swamp. Private Coleman and his crew felled 300 trees in a single day, stripped them, laid them, moved forward 200 yards. Repeat, every day, for months. When tire chains snapped, and they always snapped, welders fabricated new ones from scrap metal, working through nights where breath froze mid-exhale. When surveying equipment failed, Corporal Davis navigated by stars and dead reckoning, plotting routes through unmapped passes with accuracy that would shame peacetime engineers. When bridges washed out in spring floods, the 95th built Bailey bridges, modular steel spans, in conditions the British designers said were impossible. Assembly manuals assumed dry ground and temperatures above freezing. The 95th assembled them standing waist-deep in snowmelt, bolting frozen steel with bare hands because gloves couldn't grip the tools. Mile by mile, tree by tree, bridge by bridge, the white regiments advanced. The black regiments advanced faster. September 24, 1942. Soldiers Summit, Yukon Territory. Two bulldozers emerged from opposite tree lines, facing each other across 50 feet of virgin wilderness. Private Refines, Sims Jr., pushing north from Dawson Creek. Private Alfred Jalufka, driving south from Alaska. 6 months, 1,500 miles. Two crews cutting through mountain and muskeg from opposite ends with nothing but compasses and determination. They stopped, stared, realized. They'd met almost perfectly on line. Sims climbed down. Jalufka climbed down. They shook hands. Black soldier, white soldier, and neither let go for a full minute. Men from both crews surrounded them, some laughing, some weeping, all understanding what they'd just proven. Behind them, a scar through the wilderness. Rough, muddy, barely passable. Ahead of them, 200 miles still to connect, another month of brutal work. But the spine was complete. The road was real. They'd taken the word impossible and buried it in permafrost. 8 months after the first pickaxe struck permafrost, the Alaska Highway opened, 1,520 miles, Dawson Creek to Fairbanks, completed not in the predicted 5 years, but in 234 days, the fastest military road ever carved through wilderness terrain. A construction miracle that defied every engineering assessment, every weather prediction, every assumption about what was possible in the Arctic. Corporal James Monroe stood at mile 1422, watching supply trucks roll north toward Fairbanks in an unbroken convoy. Proof. Rolling, diesel-burning proof. He'd swung the first pickaxe in March with frozen fingers. Now he watched the road carry the war effort north, exactly as ordered. He waited for the recognition. They all did. It never came. The official Army report, released December 1942, credited American engineering units with remarkable persistence under difficult conditions. 11,000 men had built the road. 4,000 of them were black. The report mentioned race exactly once in a footnote about Negro labor battalions providing manual support. Not engineers. Laborers. The Washington Post headline read, U.S. engineers conquer Alaska wilderness. The article praised American ingenuity and can-do spirit. It listed white regiment numbers. The 93rd, 95th, 97th, and 388th, the units that had advanced fastest, adapted best, and solved problems that stumped West Point graduates, were absent. Life magazine ran a photo spread in January 1943. 14 pages of images. Bulldozers punching through snowdrifts, bridges spanning frozen rivers, trucks navigating mountain passes. 37 photographs total. 3 showed black soldiers. All 3 showed them cooking, cleaning equipment, or standing in background formations. None showed them building. Lieutenant Colonel Heath Twitchell, who'd commanded the 97th through the entire campaign, submitted a commendation request listing 47 men by name for extraordinary technical achievement. The request was returned with a note. Commendations for Negro troops require additional justification beyond standard performance metrics. Standard performance. They'd built what white engineers called impossible in half the predicted time, with inferior equipment and systematic supply deprivation. Standard. Private Robert Colley, who'd written home about battling racism in April, wrote again in December. The road is finished. We did it. But when the generals came for the ribbon cutting, they thanked the white regiments by name and called us support personnel. Ma, we built 600 miles of this road. Our hands, our backs, our minds, and they can't even say our names. The highway stretched north, permanent and undeniable. The men who built it were already being erased. The permafrost had thawed. The record books stayed frozen solid. But history has a way of thawing what bureaucracy tries to keep frozen. The Alaska Highway wasn't just 1,520 miles of gravel and corduroy logs. It was something more dangerous to the architecture of prejudice. It was proof, carved into the earth itself, impossible to erase. You can bury names in footnotes. You can edit photographs. You can write official reports that turn engineers into laborers with the stroke of a pen. But you cannot unmake a road that shouldn't exist. Every mile they built was a question mark hammered into the permafrost. What else have you been wrong about? When white officers said black soldiers lacked the mental capacity for technical problem-solving, the 95th Regiment invented Arctic construction techniques that became standard practice. When supply officers forgot to send cold weather gear, assuming the men would fail and retreat, those same men fabricated solutions from scrap metal and kept advancing. When the terrain proved impossible, because it was impossible, they made it possible anyway. The Alaska Highway wasn't just a military route, it was a bridge across America's own divided soul. On one side, centuries of doctrine claiming that competence, intelligence, and discipline were qualities distributed by skin color. On the other, 10,000 frozen miles of evidence to the contrary, built by men who'd been told their entire lives what they couldn't do. The permafrost thawed, but so did something deeper. Because once you've seen a man design a Bailey Bridge in a blizzard, once you've watched him calculate load-bearing capacity with frozen fingers, once you've driven a road he built through terrain that defeated your best predictions, you can't quite believe the old lies with the same conviction. The men who built the Alaska Highway didn't ask for philosophical transformation. They asked for warm clothes, proper equipment, and the basic dignity of having their work acknowledged. They got none of those things, but they got something the Army couldn't take back. They proved it. Not with speeches, not with protests, with bridges that stood, with roads that carried weight, with precision that couldn't be denied, even when it was deliberately ignored. Greatness doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for belief. It begins exactly where belief ends, in the gap between you can't and watch me. The 93rd, 95th, 97th, and 388th Engineer regiments found that gap in the frozen north, and they filled it with 1,020 miles of undeniable truth. The road remembers, even when the reports forget. Today you can drive the Alaska Highway in comfort. Paved, marked, peaceful. RVs and tourists rolling north through some of the most beautiful wilderness on Earth, stopping at scenic overlooks, snapping photographs of mountains that once had no names. Mile markers count upward from Dawson Creek. 100, 500, 1,000, 1422. Most drivers don't know what the numbers mean, don't know that every 10th mile represents another day of impossible work, don't know that beneath the asphalt lies corduroy roads made from 10,000 trees, felled and laid by hand. Don't know the names. Corporal James Monroe, Private Refines Sims Jr., Sergeant William Pryor, Lieutenant James Cole, Private Robert Colley, Private Marcus Webb. Men who swung pickaxes against frozen earth until their hands bled. Men who fabricated solutions from scrap metal because proper equipment never arrived. Men who built bridges in blizzards and surveyed routes by starlight. Men who were told they lacked the intelligence for technical work, then invented techniques that rewrote Arctic engineering. There are photographs, if you know where to look. Young faces, dark skin against white snow, smiling despite everything, proud because of everything. The 93rd Engineer Regiment, the 95th, the 97th, the 388th, 4 regiments that were sent north to fail and instead succeeded beyond every measure. 4,000 men who proved that courage, skill, and determination recognize no color, only challenge and response. The road stretches north still, carrying traffic that will never know their names. built on a foundation that will never forget their hands. They didn't just change a map. They changed what America believed was possible. And on quiet winter nights, when snow covers the highway and the wind blows south from Fairbanks, you can almost hear it. The ring of pickaxes against permafrost, the rumble of bulldozers, the voices of men who refuse to accept impossible as an answer. The Alaska Highway remembers, even when we forget.